311 wouldn't emerge out of the East Coast or West Coast. Instead, they'd come from Omaha, Nebraska. The band would endure a near-death experience, a nefarious producer, and harsh critics who didn't see how ahead of their time they really were. They also dealt with lies about the band as well. But despite these obstacles, they always looked at themselves as 5 friends from Omaha who always carried a positive message. And it would really make them an anomaly when they were first coming up. Today, let's talk about the rise of 311. The story of 311 begins with a lot of stops and starts, most notably with frontman and rhythm guitarist Nick Hexum. His father worked as a pharmacologist who ran experiments on slaughterhouse tissue, while his mother was a practicing psychologist. His parents, however, were quite musical in their youth, with his dad playing trumpet while his mother played piano and sang, and even recorded a jazz album in the 60s. Nick would take up piano lessons at the age of 5, and he'd later pick up guitar with his first song he learned, strangely enough, being Jimmy Buffett's Margaritaville. Prior to residing in Nebraska, Hexum's family lived in Washington, D.C., telling Rolling Stone, "I was bused to a school that was only 30% white, and the kids used to sing Sugar Hill Gang's Rapper's Delight on the way to school. That had a profound impact on me. I loved being around all the slang and the culture."
God, what can I say? I can't fit them all inside my own J, so I just take half and bust them out. I give
By the time he was in high school in the mid-80s, Hexum's family was now living in Omaha, Nebraska. It was in high school Hexum was in choir and did his first rock performance at a school talent show where he did a 3-song tribute to The Clash. He later also played guitar in jazz band where he met drummer Chad Sexton. During the same time, Hexum was playing in a band called the Eds that did both original tunes and covers, including R.E.M., The Smiths, and The Cure. And he was playing in that band with guitarist Tim Mahoney. They would get their name from their drummer, whose name was also Ed. Mahoney, for his part, was hugely influenced by Jerry Garcia of Grateful Dead. While American and British alternative rock had a huge impact on Hexum, it was Legend by Bob Marley that probably had the biggest impact on him. As a budding musician, recalling to the LA Times that his grandfather took him to a local Tower Records to buy a copy of the album when he was 8 years old. As for what the music scene in Omaha was like at the time, there really was no Omaha sound, but rather an assortment of punk bands and hard rock groups. The Eds would be short-lived as Hexum would graduate a year early and head out to Los Angeles to make it on his own in the music business.
When you came to LA, was it just you from the band that got here first and then the others followed suit?
Yeah, so I came to LA when I was 17, graduated early from high school. Right. And I just kind of floundered around. And at that time, it was all about like Guns N' Roses, and it was the end of like hair metal and stuff and on the Sunset Strip. But I was really interested in Chili Peppers, Jane's Addiction, Fishbone, Mary's Danish. Like there was this really cool scene, but it was still kind of underground.
And when he returned back to Omaha a year later for his friend Mahoney and Sexton's graduation, the trio started jamming and Hexum stayed home. He would recall to Spin, "We had a 3-piece band for a couple of years called Unity, and that's where we started blending a lot of different styles together. We were really into hip-hop and funk and punk, and the Red Hot Chili Peppers were coming out at the time, and we were like, wow, you can have punk rock energy, but then also have like chops in your music, and funk and different styles mixed together. That was sort of a watershed moment," he would remark. The trio soon moved out to Los Angeles, playing gigs at popular LA hotspots like the Coconut Teaser, but they couldn't get any traction. Hexum, feeling disillusioned with the music scene and unable to relate to musicians in LA, started partaking in partying, drinking, and doing drugs. By 1989, he'd spent time hanging out with Dead Boy Stiv Bators, with him recalling to Rolling Stone, "I can't believe I came out of it healthy and disease-free. We'd be out at clubs having the world's greatest time, but the next day I'd wake up and Realized my band wasn't going anywhere and I'd just blown all my money, so I decided to straighten out. The trio soon left Los Angeles, with Hexum heading to Germany for a short period, while Sexton and Mahoney went back home, with Sexton attending the University of Nebraska, and he would start jamming with a guitarist named Jim Watson and a student at Bryan High School, a bassist named Peanut, who took his nickname due to the shape of his head. Peanut would recall to Spin, "I remember the first time hanging out with Chad at his dorm. I had my first bong hit in his room. He was maybe 20 and I was 16. Those were great times and we bonded over that." They would also join up with the DJ and vocalist Doug S.A. Martinez. The trio would form the band Fish Hippos, and they managed to secure an opening slot for the legendary underground punk band Fugazi on June 10th, 1990 at Sokol Hall. Hexum, who was in Germany basically bumming around, got wind of the gig and headed home to join the group. Around this time, he was playing bass, but he wanted to sing and started fronting the band. But he told the musicians they needed to come up with a better name. That night on stage, the members told the audience they'd now refer to themselves as 311. 311 stands for the police code for indecent exposure, taking inspiration from a friend of theirs who actually played with them and was arrested for skinny dipping. Peanut came up with the name, and he had previously used the moniker for a talent show. But of course, interviewers early in the band's career seemed fascinated with the name and what it meant, and it wasn't uncommon for the members to joke with the press and journalists over what it really meant. One explanation they gave was that it was 5 friends making music, 3 + 1 + 1. Another was that the 3 stood for male and 11 is magic, so 311 meant male magic. Another was that it was Peanut's total every time he ate at Taco Bell. And another was that Hexum told an interviewer that the perfect song length was 3 minutes and 11 seconds. The band would audition for hours in the basement of Hexum's parents' house and played bars around Omaha, including at the venue The Fishbowl, which featured New Music Mondays. They started to build a pretty good following in their hometown, and they would record a demo with Yes producer Eddie Offord, who kind of took the band under his wing and taught them a lot about recording. To finance a demo, Hexum illegally took out a student loan, and this was around 1991-1992, and the band would also record several independent releases, with their third release actually coming out on CD, something that was almost unheard of at the time for an independent band, according to Hexum. The members of 311 would move to California by early 1992, and they found a 3-bedroom house in Van Nuys, which all the members lived in. Their days would mostly consist of playing music and shooting hoops. It may surprise you to know, though, that living in Los Angeles was not crucial to the band getting signed, but LA did prove important in exposing the members to hip-hop. Hexum would also take the time in LA to call different entertainment lawyers and record labels around town, and he would find the names of famous industry people and fudge facts about the band, and he would be like, "Hey, we're talking to Doug Morris at Atlantic," to get label attention, but it didn't really get them any further doing that. But Hexum would read a book about the music industry, and one helpful tip he learned was to send the group's demo tape to college radio with a postcard asking if they liked the music and if they played any of their songs. So the band did just that, and early on, a lot of college stations sent back postcards telling the band that they liked their music and they were playing their songs. It was this, coupled with the fact that 311 back home in Nebraska was outselling popular acts at record stores like U2 and Michael Jackson, that got them the attention of a Nashville-based label called Capricorn Records. I will say a very similar thing happened with Hootie and the Blowfish as well when they were starting out. Capricorn Records showed interest in the band, not because of anything they did in Los Angeles, but because of a demo tape they cut during their time in Omaha. Capricorn wanted 311 to play a showcase for them in LA, but the band instead opted to do the showcase back in Omaha because they could draw a crowd of about 1,000 people, where compared to LA they may only play in front of 10 people. It was in the spring of 1992 they signed a deal with Capricorn Records. That early champion of the band, Eddie Offord, would produce their first album for the label 1993's Music. Hexum would tell an Omaha paper that he wanted the group's debut record to be the only party album that ended all party albums, an album that people would put on when they would get together with other people and basically want to have a good time. 311, early in their career, of course, drew a lot of comparisons to Red Hot Chili Peppers, Rage Against the Machine, and Bob Marley, The Clash, and Beastie Boys. The single Do You Right would get some play on MTV and on local Los Angeles radio stations, with the track ultimately peaking at number 27 on the alternative airplay chart. Hexham would remark to one of their hometown papers what it was like seeing their music played on 120 minutes, remarking, "They showed the cover of our CD and it was the last video, and they were saying what an unusual place that Omaha was for a band like us to come from. But anytime you come from a new place, everyone freaks out before it's accepted as normal." Dominating radio and MTV at the time were groups from Seattle something 311 didn't really count themselves a fan of, largely due to the negativity and dim outlook on life these bands shared. But touring behind the record would prove to be difficult, as Capricorn Records had a joint partnership with Warner Brothers at the time. The head of Warner Brothers, Mo Austin, only wanted to give 311 1 month of tour support. The band opted to borrow Sexton's dad's RV so they could tour for next to nothing while also living in it. But it was a decision that nearly killed the band. During the tour, a fire on the RV as the band was traveling between gigs destroyed thousands of dollars of equipment, and the members barely escaped. They had to play the following night's gig with borrowed equipment. Thankfully, they had a rich friend back home in Omaha who lent them money to buy a new RV, and they were able to pay him back the following year. The event would further solidify the band's commitment, as Hexham told the members that all they needed was each other and the music. The band's grueling tour schedule was winning them new fans all over the country, and by the end of the year, they had played sold-out shows at LA hotspots like the Troubadour and Whiskey, with their debut record selling about 50,000 copies. The groundswell of support that came from their first album led to their sophomore effort for Capricorn Records titled Grassroots, which came out the following year. But the band hit a snag. The group would tell Rolling Stone that returning producer Eddie Offord had some serious personal problems and health issues during the recording of the record, revealing he was drinking heavily and had really erratic behavior. Offord, for his part, would fire back, telling the magazine, 311 turned into very selfish people. They're great guys, but I think they started to believe their own press. They were like spoiled kids, and yeah, I pulled a few stunts on them. I won't deny it, but they deserved it, he'd remark. By their second record, 311 ditched that place in Van Nuys all the members were staying at. They put their stuff in storage, and they would tour for months on end, and they really focused on refining their live chops. College radio, underground fanzines, and relentless touring would help the band further develop a groundswell of support. The group would have a solid start out of the gate, selling about 6,500 copies of their second record, landing them on the 193rd spot on the Billboard 200 chart. 311 would return the following year with what would be their commercial breakthrough, their self-titled record, or it's sometimes commonly referred to as the Blue Album. They would enlist producer Ron St. Germain, who had previously worked with Bad Brains, Fishbone, and Living Colour, to name a few, at the legendary Sound City Studios. Hexham would recall in an interview how the Blue Album was a return to the group's garage punk roots. Released in July of 1995, the record sold just over 20,000 copies out of the gate, landing it on the number 56 spot on the Billboard charts. Compared to their past efforts, the record would be recorded live in the studio instead of doing separate takes for each instrument. The first single, Don't Stay Home, was a modest hit, peaking at number 29 on the Billboard Modern Rock Tracks chart. But it would be the third single, Down, which was released in 1996, that finally broke the band in a big way. But it wasn't necessarily an easy sell to the label. Here's Hexham talking about wanting to release the song.
But I always felt, man, that chorus is so catchy. We got to do Down. And the label's like, that's a little abrasive, a little hard with all that rapping and like row, row, row. So,
God.
But they came around.
Yeah, they came around eventually.
The single would shoot to the top of the Modern Rock Tracks chart, beating out competition from REM, Pearl Jam, and Soundgarden. It also resulted in the band getting significant airplay on MTV outside of specialty programs like 120 Minutes. The irony of the whole thing was that the song was written as a tribute or a thank you to the group's hardcore audience, and now they were being embraced by the mainstream. The irony wasn't lost on the band, with Hexham telling Billboard, "We are really concerned about maintaining the level of credibility and adoration that we had when we were an underground band." 311 followed it up with another successful single in All Mixed Up, which peaked at number 4 on the charts. The same year, the band made their first national late night appearances, playing both Conan O'Brien's late night show and David Letterman's.
They're a great rock and roll band from Nebraska. Go Huskers, am I right, boys? They have one of the top-selling albums in the country, not doing so well in the city.
But despite the upswing in momentum, the band largely brushed it off, keeping more focused on the music. With Hexum telling the Cedar Rapids Gazette, "We always said that when we feel like we're really hitting our stride, we're going to call the album 311. On this new album, we recorded everything at once to capture the live energy. We were most pleased with the album." Hexum would add in a separate interview that he was surprised at radio's response to the record, adding, "Alternative radio says we're too rap or too funky and R&B, and rap radio says we're too rock. It's like we're sitting right in between so many formats." In reality, they were sitting kind of in the same area as groups like Red Hot Chili Peppers and Rage Against the Machine, albeit with a much more positive message that straddles the line between spirituality and street-savvy messages. And that was something that the band frequently saw mentioned in the press, just how positive they were. Peanut would tell the Winston-Salem Journal, "We are all spiritual people who emit a mood. Being positive is a natural thing for us. Being negative is self-destructive, and we are definitely not into that whole scene." The band's uplifting mood would sometimes result in their fans throwing flowers at them. 1996 proved to be a massive year for the band. Their never-ending tour saw them play on the Horde Festival, the Warped Tour, and open for a newly reunited Kiss, remarking how they were probably booed the least out of all the bands who opened for Kiss. They'd also play with Cypress Hill as well as No Doubt. The band would also put out a documentary video in 1996 titled Enlarged to Show Detail, which would also end up going platinum. Some would claim the name 311 would fit the band since 1996 saw them overexposed with both a multi-platinum record and a hugely successful video release. Now, one part of the story that's frequently not talked about was their record label's troubles. By 1994, Capricorn was struggling. The label, which was home of the Allman Brothers decades prior, had a partnership with Warner Brothers. But Warner soon left the deal, and Sony would end up showing up, giving the label $4 million to operate as an independent company. But it wasn't long after that Sony asked for repayment, and it looked like Capricorn couldn't pay them back. It wasn't until April of 1996 the company signed a joint venture deal with Mercury Records, which allowed them to repay Sony and gave the company a huge boost in the marketing and PR department, which greatly benefited 311. The marketing team in Mercury would tell Billboard magazine that they studied what the previous marketing plans had done wrong for the band, and they treated the group's Blue album as if it were 311's first record. Their first part of their strategy was to make sure that cities that the band was playing were well stocked with a lot of copies of the Blue album and their back catalog, with the marketing team telling Billboard, "We devised a plan for a band that plays 250 shows a year and sells out 250 shows a year. It was a matter of making sure the kids could connect the dots and making sure the catalog was equally positioned." They would add that a mailing list was also crucial next to a guerrilla marketing campaign in major metropolitan areas like New York City, San Francisco, Boston, LA, Atlanta, and of course their hometown of Omaha. They'd also do skateboard sticker giveaways in skate shops and traditional shops, and they also heavily advertised the band in skate magazines. But not everything went according to plan in 1996. It was reported by numerous publications that the band members' old high school and several other school districts barred students from wearing any shirts that featured the 311 name. The reason? Well, there was a rumor going around that the band's name was a reference to the Ku Klux Klan, with K being the 11th letter of the alphabet. Some students, including Nick Hexum's younger brother Zach, defied the band in one paper, and Nick meanwhile answered back that censorship always backfires, and he was horrified by how quickly national publications like Rolling Stone and Spin picked up the story, referring to it as lowbrow journalism. 311 would laugh off the accusation, claiming that it referred to indecent exposure, adding, "If they want to ban us, they should use something that's true, like how we advocate for the decriminalization of marijuana." A journalist with the band's hometown paper, the Omaha World Herald, an African-American writer named Tony Moton, who had covered the band extensively starting from the early part of their career, came to the band's defense, knowing them on a personal and professional level. He'd point to their influences of funk and rap, and the fact that they toured with groups like Cypress Hill and Farside, and how the band's lyrics talked about racial harmony. School officials, meanwhile, claimed at the time that they had a responsibility to respond to the allegations even if they were unsubstantiated, and they had to act accordingly, with the principal telling the Omaha World Herald, "When you are primarily a white school like Omaha Westside High School, people are going to see us as having a lot of bigotry. It's a tough line to walk." Controversy aside, the group's third record would end up going triple platinum, and it would be the biggest album of 311's career. That does it for today's video, guys. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again in Rock Culture Stories. Take care.